Welcome to the Healing While Discovering Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Michelle. I'm an intuitive transformational coach, certified life coach, certified NLP practitioner, and speaker. I've spent the last 22 plus years helping myself and my clients learn how to create their own happiness and live more abundant lives. In this time, I've also overcome and healed from child sexual molestation, a compulsive eating disorder, hunger, and homelessness. Now it's your turn to move forward with your life and heal from childhood traumas or past experiences. In this podcast, I'll share how I was able to overcome all of my past struggles, as well as my personal stories of overcoming jealousy, loneliness, resentment, and bitterness, and how I learned to forgive. I'll also help you explore your shadow self, deal with having low or no self-esteem, and address feelings of not being worthy or loved. Using my personal experiences and extensive training, as well as stories of grief, loss, depression, and anxiety from my guests, I'll help you change your life and finally heal. Hey loves, welcome back to the Healing While Discovering Yourself podcast. I am so glad that you are here. You know, I always say it is an honor and a privilege for me that you would hit play and listen and download and share and leave a review and all of the things. I am so grateful for you. I don't take it for granted because I know there's so many amazing podcasts that you could be listening to. And so the fact that you chose this one, it really warms my heart. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I am going to ask that you at least go back to the first 2 to 3 episodes before you decide whether or not this podcast is right for you, because those first few episodes will tell you a little bit more about me, who I am, and how I operate and things like that. So don't just judge this podcast based off of one episode. And actually, while we're talking about that, you shouldn't judge anybody anyway, but that's a whole nother story. And maybe I'll record a podcast episode on that. But anyway, so listen, y'all. I am so excited about my guest today. We have Nicole Strychaz. And the reason why I'm excited for Nicole to be on this podcast is because of the way that Nicole and I met. First of all, Nicole is one of the best copywriters in the business, like hands down. I have never met anyone who can write like Nicole writes. And what makes her writing so beautiful is that, well, there are a number of things that makes her writing so beautiful. First of all of her writing is connected to source, to a higher level, and you can feel that. And number 2, she really knows how to take on the voice of the person that she's writing for. And so a lot of the emails, if you're on my email list, a lot of the emails that you get from me, they come from her. Like she wrote them, right? I'm not a pretender to be like, oh, I do everything. No, I don't. There are some obviously that I write, but you probably couldn't tell the difference because Nicole is just she's so good at what she does. And she has probably one of the biggest hearts that I've ever met. And so, well, you know, as this interview like progresses, we'll probably share how we met. Maybe Nicole will share that, but it was in such a beautiful way. And so I'm so glad that she's here because we're going to talk about using writing as a healing modality. But before we get off into that, thank you for being here, Nicole, and please introduce yourself.
Oh my God. I am so touched by that introduction. I really, really am. I do feel like my writing does come from a higher place and have an energetic imprint. So for you to recognize that and like feel it,
yes,
it's really nice. I felt like I was listening to someone explain my life for me. I was like, oh, she's summing it up better then I can sum it up. So that's really exciting. I did start out trying to write just for myself as a book. And then I realized I couldn't write fiction. Like it just wasn't my thing. Like I couldn't figure out how to explain how the characters were working. And so I decided that that wasn't for me. And I started blogging because I was a stay-at-home mom and I was learning all this stuff about like processed foods and what was in our diet. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell people. And I've always had that feeling like, I have to tell people this. I have to tell people this. Mm. And it really started an awakening for me where I started to wonder, why do I feel like I have to tell people this? Because I am the type of person that if you're not asking for my opinion, I usually won't just give it around saying like, you should do this, you should do that. But when it came to writing, it's kind of what I was saying, like, hey, you guys should be looking at this, or did you know, or if you're experiencing this, it's probably an awakening. Like I wanted to tell the people things. And I started to help people with their writing. And I would have people come to me that felt the call to write. But what happened was they weren't making the time to write though. They would admit to me like, I know I'm supposed to be writing. I can see these books before me. I know that like I'm meant to bring this to the world. And then they would disappear and go about their regular life. I even took on some books and some editing clients. And then like they would disappear too. I'd give them a draft and then they would be like, I'm busy. And they legit had full lives and were busy. I mean, I didn't feel they were just trying not to be, but writing for whatever reason wasn't working into their life. It wasn't a priority. Mm-hmm. And that is why I started helping spiritual entrepreneurs, because they have to write. Yeah. Like they have to, you have to. So it's not something you could just put on the back burner or decide maybe later. Like if you're not emailing your email list, if you're not reaching out on social media, if you're not putting out some sort of content, whether it's an ebook or a course or something, then you probably don't have a business. Right. It's not, unless you're like full referral based, but even then you're probably doing something. Yep. And so for me, I like all writers can help any, but I found my niche with the spiritual entrepreneurs because it was a need. Mm-hmm. It wasn't so much like an admission. Like people would see, oh my gosh, I meant to write these children's books. And then years have gone by where they're like, I haven't done it yet. Someday I'll get back to it. And it was like, oh, it was like crushing for me because I can see it too when I hold the space. Yeah. I can see that vision. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, if these people would bring through what they see, it would be amazing. It might not be lucrative though. And that's where I think it became like kind of tricky. Like, do I make space for something that may or may not make money? Whereas like you were saying in my introduction, is I think writing has a vibration. Yes. So it's not necessarily like you might read a book that changes your life. Yes. Whether or not that author ever writes another book. Yes. Yes. They might just write one and it might just be the one that you need. So it's really tricky. Like I was first figuring out like, why do I even feel the need to write and tell people stuff on a blog? Yeah. And then why is it when people come to me, they admit that to me, but then they don't write. Yeah. And then like, how do I find like space in that so that I get to write full time and not have to do something that takes away from that. Yeah. Kind of thing.
Yeah. That's so good. And I'm so glad you brought up the fact about like people who have these visions and dreams and they feel like, oh my gosh, like writing, it's in me. I feel like I'm destined to do that. And yet they don't do it.
Right.
What do you think that's about?
You know, I think a lot of times we put too much pressure on it. Like, oh, I could write this book, but what does it mean? Who's it going to help? Mm-hmm. Who am I to write it? Mm-hmm. Who am I to tell people this? I think we just like hold our, like I feel like sometimes it's a water faucet and you just turn it off instead. Like, no, that's not for me. Whereas I feel like if it's coming to you and you had the idea, it's yours to bring through. Like if you have that moment where you're like, this is mine, but then you have to make the space. And from my own experience, I wrote a book. It's not out. It's still on my computer, but it was a healing journey. Yeah. And something about writing is very like it could put you in a dark night of the soul. Like you hear people going off to a cabin and they're like, I almost went crazy writing my book or something. Like it can really put you through healing if you're meant to heal. Sometimes I think you've healed and then you just write it and it comes out. Mm-hmm. But other times I think you're healing as you go. Yeah. So I think it's just kind of that, it's all of it. Like, what is this for? Why? It's the same with intuition though, right? Where something will tell you like, do not go to that party. And you're like, well, I'm just going to go because it doesn't. And then you might see someone like you didn't want to see, you know, something, you eat something that makes you sick. And you're like, I told myself not to go to that party. You know, I think it's the same. It's easy to put our intuition on the back burner and just be like, another day, another time, I'll get to it. I'll get to it later. And it could just be the people coming to me at that time. Like maybe I wasn't ready to help them or, you know, we just don't know. Yeah. I just know that it didn't end up being the path because they didn't go on to write where I could help them and we could develop that relationship. And same with the books. Like, you know, I have a friend that we were working on a book for her and it's amazing. It's like channeled but she always tells me like, I don't even remember where I put it in my computer. We need to get back to it, but I can't even find the last draft. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you should be. And I found it and I was reading it. And I was like, this is amazing. Like it needs to be out there. Yeah. But those are two different things though, right? Like you write it, but then you have to become the person who promotes it, who submits it, who has a platform for it. It's not always the same personality.
That's true.
You know,
that's true.
It's like a different skill set, really promoting yourself and having a platform and pitching.
Yes. You know what? Then that's actually a great entry point, I think, into the idea of and I want to talk about like what it means to like have a channeled message or to write from like that higher place. But before we get off into that, you know, it's interesting that you're talking about like it has to be two different personalities almost, where it's like the person who actually writes the book, but then there needs to be the person who like markets and promotes the book. And that person is actually you, like you are that person to do both. And so I think that that's why it's important for us that to really, I think that's the importance of being healed, right? Because when we write from a healed, and when I say healed, I don't mean like, oh, everything is perfect, because I've been on the healing journey for over 22 years. And I don't think that I'll ever get off the journey, because there's always, as I grow and evolve and expand, then I'll have a greater capacity to heal from the deeper wounds that are within me. Right. So when I say healed, I don't mean like there's nothing else ever going to come up, because they will, just healed in the moment. But I think that's the importance of people like writing from a healed place when it comes to like putting their work out there, right, to the public. Because if you're writing from that healed place, then you can write the book. And then when it comes time to like sell it and talk about it, you're like, look, hey, I poured from my heart, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You can say, hey, this is a character that lived within me, this, and it'll be, not easy, but easier to promote it, because you're like, look, this is raw. This is authentic. This is me. But for the person who doesn't want to write a book, right? Who is on this healing journey and they're not sure of like, what are my next steps? What should I do next? Like, how can they use writing as that modality to help them at least, what's that saying? Push the needle forward. Is that a saying?
Yeah. Move the needle forward. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think writing as a whole is healing. So I remember having a journal at 11 and writing in it. And it was like, my dad used to see us every other weekend. And that time that he picked us up, he was always late. And that really bothered my sister and I, because my mom was ready for us to go. You know, she had like us packed up, like sitting by the door. The TV was off. Like she was like, because it was before this shared custody where people were doing week on, week off. That was at the time the norm. So we'd just be sitting there, and it really felt hurtful that he only saw us every other weekend and then didn't come on time. And it was probably like 15 minutes late in the grand scheme of things. Looking back as an adult, I don't actually think it was that much, but at the time it felt like dramatic.
Yes.
So I actually had a journal where I was writing, Dad's late again. I'm really upset. And it's just, I think that's therapeutic when you let out the emotions of it. Yeah. And then as a teenager, I wrote poetry a lot. I was depressed at that time. I was making terrible decisions. And my one constant, though, was that I used to write poetry, and I would write it and then I would rewrite it in a different color pen, and I the same one over and over. Wow. And it was just really comforting for me. I would do it all hours of the night, just all the time. Wow. And when I went back and read it as an adult, later on, I expected it was going to be teenage angst, because that me at the time didn't understand the world. That's why I was making the terrible choices. I didn't know I had the power to change my life and all those things. I felt like a victim of my circumstances, which I didn't know. Right. But when I went back and read the poetry, it was not like that. It was had this higher understanding, and it was talking about the world and my role in it and all these things where I was this is good. Right. My 24-year-old self or whatever I was at the time, I was actually surprised because my decisions and my personality at the time was not like that. Yeah. But the poetry had this bigger perspective. And it was my first clue that we can channel right when we just tune in. Yeah. And I also think what felt comforting was probably my higher self. I was probably connecting to my higher self or my angelic support team or something. Mm-hmm. And that's why doing it over and over and over felt comforting, because I must not have felt alone, which is what I think looking back now. And then how did I have a bigger perspective when that person living in that teenage life felt so limited? Yeah. But then here I felt I was talking about just patterns in the culture. It was about the collective consciousness in a way. And I'm how did I know that? Yeah. And so later, fast forward through my awakening journey, when I started to question, well, what is this writing? And why did I write that way? And why did it feel good? That's when I started realizing we can connect to our higher self, and we could actually heal stuff. We could say, do I need this pattern anymore? Or every time I do this, my life seems to fall apart. Do I still need that? What's happening? And you probably come up with that a lot in your work, where people hit that pattern. Yep. And that's what I was doing with writing. I started to explore it. I started to do things burn things under the full moon, things I didn't want anymore. I would just write, and I'm I don't even want this. And I would just burn it, and then I would replace it though, so I didn't leave it open with what I did want. And I was something's happening when we write that's more than we know. So I think it's therapeutic. And even in the traditional sense, therapists will use that. They'll have you write a letter to a family member. Yes. And then you have the choice. You can either send it to the family member or not, or you can just read it in the office. I had a therapist that did that with my mom, and I chose not to send the letter because I thought it would hurt her, but it was still very therapeutic. We discussed it. I cried. We worked through the emotions, and I felt as if I'd sent it. Really, I got that healing. Yeah. So you have to think there's something about it, something about putting pen to your paper and letting those thoughts out, your deepest dark ones, your happy ones, your even admitting you want to have an amazing life. Sometimes people have a hard time writing that on paper, that I deserve to be happy. Yes. You can write it, Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. You said so many things that I'm that's so good. That's so good. But that is so true. Obviously from my perspective, everything you said is so true, because especially about the writing piece, because I'm not necessarily a big writer. I know how to write, I can write, and I can actually write
scholarly, I can write professionally, and I can write like streetwise. So I'm very good at writing. Well, the reason why we work together is because I don't know how to write salesy. Like, I mean, that's not in a way that doesn't sound like sales. I don't know the psychology behind it. It's weird because I'm getting my PhD in psychology. But anyway, that's a different story.
That's funny.
But like I wrote a letter to back in, or maybe it was last year, I went through this huge, like, not transformation, but I guess it was like this really big transformation where I felt a part of me had died, but I've always been, well, I shouldn't say I've always been, because I used to have a really big fear of death. And then I actually stepped into that fear of death and realized like, oh, this is not scary at all. And I realized that a lot of people, the reason why a lot of people fear death, or actually I'll just speak for myself. The reason why I feared death is because I felt like death meant the end of something. And like, that was it. And in stepping into my fear of death, I realized that it may be the end of something, but it also represents the beginning of something else, right? Like something has to die in order for something new, something else to come up. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the capacity to hold everything. And so that was like my revelation. And so I went through this huge, transformation, and really a part of me, the old me, had died. But again, I honored that. And so I wrote a letter to myself. And, some people say, write the letter and burn it. But that letter that I wrote to myself, it wasn't for me to burn. I wrote the letter in honor of the older version of me, right? And in that letter, I said, oh my gosh, you have been through so much, and you have, held your own, and you're strong. And I just like listed everything that I had, that version of me had done. And then at the end, I said, and even with all of that, the trials and all of the heaviness that you went through, I can only stand at this version of me because of what you did. And that was like, after I wrote the letter, it was almost like I gave myself permission to step into the bigger version of myself, the higher version, the better version, whatever terminology you want to use, of myself. Because before I wrote the letter, it was, even though I knew that I was changing and a part of me had died, it felt like there, like something was missing. And I decided to write that letter. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this letter is in honor of, and it's not to be burned. Like that part of me didn't exist or whatever was useless. Is like, no, this letter is to be preserved, because the truth of the matter is I'm going to evolve again. And then this version of me that I am now is going to die, and, all of that. But writing is so, like, writing that letter really helped me. So when you say, Nicole, like, channeled writing and channeled it, like, obviously I know what it means because we work together, but can you just explain for like the listeners or people who are like watching this video, what it means to write from like that higher perspective or that channel place, especially as you mentioned, going back to your journals and you're like, whoa, who was this person?
Right. Because I wasn't living that way. I do want to say, when you say though, that you're not a salesperson, is I think the reason that we've got along so well is because we think of it more collectively as like persuasion. Like I'm always telling you, like, they just need to know what you have so they can decide if they want it or not. Like we didn't become pushy together. That's true. Like we've made a team where we're like, well, what do they need to know so they know if they're going to buy this? And your most recent sales page, I would say, has come leap years from when we met, and you wrote that all by yourself. You did all by yourself, because we've talked so much about that. It's not about selling, really. It's about like, do they know? And even when you're saying doors closing, it's like, they need to know time is running out.
Right.
Like you don't have till tomorrow to make this decision.
I do want to say, and I think that's the beauty of your writing, is that, and you're right. And even the work that I do, that it's from a place of service. It's not like, hey, you need to buy this now because you're broken. It's like, no, let me share this information with you. And if you find this information helpful, here's the whatever you need to get more help or more support or whatever it is. And that's what makes your writing so powerful, because it never feels, first of all, I'm like, did I write this? Did I tell her to write this? And then secondly, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so great, because it doesn't feel like, do this thing now, like some people in the industry that they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I really didn't resonate with that kind of selling. So it took me a long time, because I was putting out my blog posts and digital products. And I was like, everything I bought, every template, every course I took, I was like, oh, this feels icky. Like, I don't want to say this stuff. So it took me a while to reconcile that like, oh no, we're just letting them know because we love our product so much.
Yes.
And we're so passionate about what we're doing that it's not so much about like, you have to buy and like, this is your window of blah.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about channeling, there's kind of two ways I see it. So for most, because what I do with you, I am channeling your higher self. That's why it sounds like you. So that's going to be like a leap from what I'm going to first say.
Yeah.
But I think it's a matter of taking time to remove the clutter. So clearing your space, making sure you understand which is your ego voice, which is like a wounded child coming up, just understanding like what voice is talking. And I personally don't think any of them are wrong, because there are books where the person is all in their ego and you're so mad at them and you're frustrated and you're like, why can't they see the solution? But that doesn't mean it's not a good book, because it's getting you to be part of it. You know more than they know.
Yep.
But when I'm trying to channel, I'm always trying to get like the clearest content I can. Yeah. And my ego used to try to like sneak in there. So I would be writing and it would be like, you know, life is good. I think you should do this, this, and this. And then I would feel my ego would come in like, who are you to write this? Nobody's going to listen. Like, it doesn't sound good. Who cares? No one's going to read it. So I think the importance of channeling and clearing your space is just that, you know, when that voice isn't really meant to be in it.
Yes.
Because if you're trying to get like your highest, your purest self, that voice is not it. But it's still okay to let that voice speak sometimes or whatever. But when I'm channel writing something that I want to be like on a blog post or a book or even in an email, I don't want it to come. I don't want it to have baggage, if that makes sense. Like, I just want it to be like the pure you. So when you say like, it sounds like me, it's like, because I've tuned into your highest self. And then I've merged what we've talked about with the persuasion and like the doors closing or whatever. And I let it just speak, but I don't want that. Like, we don't want our insecurities to come in.
Right.
Like, you know, whatever you're dealing with during a launch or whatever, even if you're writing a book, like whatever, unless you're working through those insecurities, you probably don't want them in the writing.
Yes.
Because then it would sound almost like, you will love my product, but I don't know if I'm good enough to give it to you, you know, because we all battle that.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if you really should have it.
Right.
I don't know if I'm ready for this abundance. Like all this weird stuff would be in it.
Like, you should join me. Actually, no, you shouldn't, because I don't know, who am I to tell you to join me? Just join me. Yeah.
Yeah. If you get more complicated with it, which of course I have because I've spent time with it, but an intuitive reader would probably be the same, an intuitive healer, people who have learned to just purely connect up to their higher self and to recognize any clutter and clear their space are probably doing a very similar thing to what I'm doing. I just happen to believe that for me, writing has been powerful. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I always come back to the writing. Yeah. And I think it's like you bring it into the physical, but you could channel. I think musicians are channeling. I think when you hear a musician, someone singing and you get those goosebumps.
Yes.
I think they're channeling their higher self. And that's why you feel it.
Yep.
Or a really good speaker like Martin Luther King.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a dream speech. Like, you were just like goosebump, like all over. Like, I feel like he was just channeling up there. Like, he's connected to. Yeah. some energetic something that's
right.
powerful.
Right. Well, and especially in talking about like Martin Luther King in like his speeches, like it's just so interesting that the day before he was murdered, that he even said, you know, we're going to get to the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we're going to get there. And then less than 12 hours later, he was murdered.
Yeah.
So that idea that, oh my gosh, he was truly speaking from a higher place, right? Like he knew that something was going to happen. And for people to look around him, it's kind of like, you know, Martin, you're going to be there when we get there. You fighting hard. But, you know, there was something in him. And like you said, I that is true about anyone who is, and everyone who is, I think, intuitive, right? Who is tapped into our intuition, because even like with my clients, I'm very clear that like I'm trauma sensitive and I'm also an intuitive coach. And so with one session that I had with the client, we were sitting there and we were talking and so I just said, well, they obviously they know me. And I said, you know, just, is there any, what word did I use? Oh, shoot. See, this is what with my coaching sessions, I try like not to remember things that happen, but, I said, I'm feeling some apprehension, you know, what's that about? And, you know, we talked about it. And at first it was like, oh no, I'm not apprehensive about nothing. And as a coach, I don't force anything. It's kind of like, I just hold the space, and we kept talking. And then they were like, oh, I am apprehensive and here's what it's about. And so I was like, okay, well, do you want to talk about it? So we talked about it. And obviously like that was a real block for them. And they didn't even realize that the thing that we ended up discussing was a huge block for them. And there was no way for me to know what this block was. I just felt it. Right. And so I think that's what you're saying when it comes to like your writing and right.
My tool happens to be writing, but you could be an artist. You could be, and when we're talking about the Martin Luther King, his speeches, if you could listen to it now, and I'm going to guess you can listen to it 20 years from now or 30 years from now, it still has that energetic imprint. And there's certain songs that are like that too. Like every time you hear them, you're like, oh, that is like good. And I think art's that way. I think books can be that way. So I think anytime you're like just really tapped into that higher energy, and I've had it happen, like it'll happen to me. I'll feel it when I'm speaking sometimes too, when I'm explaining something. It's almost like I go into this zone and the words are coming out and I'm like with them and I know what I'm saying, but it's just like, whoa, they're just like flowing out. So it could be that too, or like how you're recognizing the problems. Like it's like you could see someone's blind spot. It sounds like that they can't see. And you just have that gift and you don't necessarily know why or how, you just know, you know.
Right. It's like, because everything really truly is energy. And you mentioned this earlier about like writing has a vibration. I don't know if you mentioned it like before we started the interview or if you mentioned it within the episode, but you mentioned that like there's a vibration to writing. And I think that there's a vibration to everything. And when we are tapped into spirit, to God, to source, you know, whatever you want to call it, then we can tap into that same frequency. Right. And sometimes it's because the frequency is one language. And as humans, we speak another language. Sometimes it's hard to pick up on like, okay, what is this frequency? Like, what is this vibration? Like it's something. And then it's like apprehension. Oh yeah. Okay. That's it. And again, they may not necessarily know it or see it or whatever, but it's like, you know, that it's there.
Yeah. Right. And then we don't always take the time. Like you can have a nagging feeling for weeks before you decide like, wait a minute, I'm going to sit down. I was talking to my brother yesterday about some part where I'm kind of stuck. And I was like, I'm not asking this in meditation. Like, why don't I just ask? Like, why does this feel stuck? You know, why am I sitting here every day going like, this feels stuck, or this feels stuck? I'm like, why am I not like tuning in and just seeing like, okay, I feel like I'm here. And it's like, I feel like I've moved to here, to a different thing. Like you were talking about with the old self. Like I've had like a new self kind of come in, but it's not matching yet. And so I'm just sitting in that uncomfortable. And I was like, well, why don't I just like ask? Like, why don't I just like tune into it?
Yeah.
But so, yeah. So I think we all have the ability to channel, and it's just a matter of getting quiet, a little bit distraction free, taking the time. Like I said, I'm like literally every day, like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working?
Right.
But I wasn't sitting down to see like, oh, well, why isn't it working?
Right.
Which I imagine that you're holding that space with your clients, where that person probably every day was faced with a situation that had to do with that apprehension.
Yeah.
But until you make that space and you're talking about it, it's like, oh gosh, I've been carrying this.
Yes.
Well, you know.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So for the person who is like not a writer, because it's so funny, because I told my therapist, she was like, Andrea, maybe you should like consider having a journal that you write in. I was like, oh no, I am not writing in a journal. And then it dawned on me, like, Andrea, every morning after you meditate, you write in a journal. So what was all that about? Right? Like, what would you, like, literally, Nicole, every day when I'm done meditating, I literally write in my journal, even if it's like 5 sentences. Sometimes it's a whole page. Sometimes it's like 5.
Yeah. Right.
But I think it feels
That's funny.
Yeah. Because I don't ever want something to like feel like a task. And writing for me, it feels like it's a task. And I don't know if it's because of like all the years, like, you know, my bachelor's degree, my master's degree. Mm-hmm. I mean, my PhD is new, but I don't know if it's all the years of having to write to get the degree where I have like this like mini aversion to writing in a journal, because I don't want it to be a task. But it's so therapeutic for me, and it allows me the opportunity to really just get like if I have a powerful revelation during meditation and I don't want to forget about it, well, writing about it immediately afterwards, like it cements it. So it's like, even if I do forget, I can always reference back to the journal. Right. So my question is like, so for the person who like me, who's like, I'm not a writer, I don't write in journals, even though I do every day. Like, how do they like, or even someone who really truly is not a writer, right? Like they don't have journals. How can they start writing? Because we've already talked about how healing writing can be. So what are some steps that you recommend they take to really develop that healing modality?
Well, I think taking away any preconceived notions of what you think writing is, because like you said, you're doing it, but when your therapist said it, it felt more loaded. Yes. And it wasn't something that you wanted to do. And I feel like that's okay. Yeah. Like, I don't actually ever write like Dear Diary. I do more like you do, where I meditate, I tune in, and I capture it. I capture things on my phone. I even considered capturing things like a voice memo as counting, because I'll do that. And sometimes I'll convert that to text later, where like maybe I want to write an email. So I'll be out walking and it'll come to me. So I'll just talk into my voice recorder. And then when I get home, I'll type it up. But I think what you're describing is kind of like, is what I consider alchemy. I consider that writing alchemy, because you've tuned in, you're quiet, you don't have any distractions, you get that really cool insight. Yeah. I think that writing it down is just letting the universe know you heard it. Like, okay, I got the message, I heard it. Otherwise they keep delivering it and delivering it and delivering it, or you might forget it. And then you missed out on the magic because you just got that cool insight when you're quiet, whether you even think it's the universe or not. But I think I have a blog post and it's something like, forget the rules when it comes to writing. Ooh. And that's why, because I think we grew up with all these, writing has to be this way and that way. And you're worried about your punctuation and your grammar, and you're getting marked down with the red pen like for it, you know? So it creates all this trauma. Because I was even thinking about it, my 11-year-old, he's very succinct. So he can take in like all this information, but he'll sum it all up in like a sentence. So, which is like super insightful. Yes. We're always like, oh my gosh, when he talks, like you just pay attention, because and his grandparents like don't understand him because it's too far out there. They're always like, what? But his teachers are always saying, elaborate, say more, speak more, not enough, need more. Like it's, even though he can put it in a sentence. And when I read the sentence, I'm like, he summed up the whole story in that one sentence, but it's not 10 sentences. So it's wrong. And he's getting marked down. So I've let him just be
Yes.
Because I'm like, I don't want you to hate writing, because maybe he'll go on one day to just be like a caption person.
Yeah, right.
So you're like, you never know. Like he might be like known for these one-liners that just like get you.
Exactly.
So, but I could see how it's going to create this thing where he hates to write because he's constantly being told what you put is not right. It's not good enough. Wasn't long enough. You did it wrong. Whereas when I read it, I'm like, wow, that is, you did answer the question. And he's like, I don't have anything else to say about it, Mom.
Right.
Like, I just can't think of anything else to say. And I'm like, it would be fluff. It really would be fluff if he puts more. But you know, he's going to be traumatized. Like every single English teacher every year is telling him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
so I think that happens to a lot of us. I had a teacher in college that he was about the comma splice. My sister and I decided to take this English class during summer to like get ahead or something. It didn't even have to be academic, but we chose it. And oh my gosh, he kept marking us down for what he called comma splices. And I didn't understand it. My brain did not understand like what his problem was. I kept looking it up and I'm like, I don't get it. It's like when two sentences are like complete sentences and they shouldn't be together and you separate them with a comma. But when I was reading the sentences, I was like, they seem right to me. Like, I don't get it. So I got to where I just stopped using commas. And for the whole rest of my English lit career, I just almost never used a comma because I would get marked so much more down if I used it incorrectly. Whereas if you don't have it, they would just put like a little line.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like the little comma for you. Yep. But when you used it wrong, it was like, you know, a whole grade could go down because I had these commas wrong. But it was funny. Like it put all this pressure on punctuation for me where I was like, I don't know where to use this comma. Right. My brain just doesn't understand it. And I think that happens to a lot of people. You get a teacher. I had another teacher that kept saying, like, we read a book and we had to explain our view on it. And he kept saying it was plagiarism. Like you have to cite your sources. And if I'm saying it was Dr. Faustus, the book, if I'm saying about it, like, where did I get it from? And I'm like, but you told me to write my opinion. It was so confusing. And then I got scared about, was I always citing sources?
Right.
So I would cite like so many sources, like crazy. I'm like, this isn't even a quote, but I'm going to put it because I'm afraid you might think it's plagiarism. So I think all those things start getting in there so that by the time your therapist says, just write in a journal, you're like,
I don't write. That's too much. It's like, yes, you do write, Andrea, every day.
Right. But when it's just like, when you think no one's looking, when you think no one's going to read it, when it's just you and your thoughts and there's no pressure on it, you're fine. And then, but when you start to think like, okay, well, maybe I'll turn it into a blog post. It could feel like, what about my punctuation? Am I this? Am I that?
Yeah.
Or emails. Like you're like, what, you know?
Yeah. You know, you bring up a good point because, okay. So for the person who like who's not a writer or even maybe a version, so the first thing is to like, let go of the preconceived notion of what you think the writing is supposed to look like. Cause technically like your son being succinct, the writing could be one sentence, right? Like
could be right for his whole life. He might be like super good at like these one-liners. He might be like a quote person. Right. Quoting something. Like who knows? If he can hold on to that. Right. I guess that was the rest of my point. Like if he can make it out of school and hold on to that ability that he has to sum everything up in that one sentence, it's probably going to be really powerful. And then, so it's kind of like, to answer your question, people could ask, well, why do I feel drawn to writing? And maybe it's just to capture those great insights. And then that's what you do. But if you're feeling like, God, I really do feel like I want to write in a journal. Well, then what does that look like? How about if I just write with my headphones on and see like what wants to come out? You know, like, I think it just take away any kind of, like, if you're feeling like you want to write for some reason, just ask yourself, well, what is it? Is it just bullets? Is it just, you know, do I just want to write main ideas? Do I want to write to an audience? Do I want to share my story? Do I want to write social media, but like really connect and not feel like I have to do it the way everyone else is doing it? Like, what is it that I want to do? And then recognize that writing can also be just talking into a voice memo and then capturing it later. It doesn't have to be anything.
Yeah.
I think it just brings it into our physical, like, consciousness.
Yes.
Like, it makes you see it like, okay, I received this message, or, writing down a note, something you want to remember. You're just capturing that idea.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything formal. It doesn't even have to have a period.
Right.
It doesn't have to have a capital letter. Like,
right. I was going to ask you about that too. Well, actually, two things you said about like the formal writing and then bringing it into our, like, the physical existence. Yeah. Because I was going to ask you, why do you think writing is such a powerful healing modality? And you answered it by saying, like, because it really truly does bring it into our physical awareness. Because, right. A lot of times when we don't make things, I'll use the word tangible for lack of a better word, even though like words aren't tangible in a sense, whereas this microphone is tangible. But if we don't make things like tangible, then it kind of just like stays on repeat in our head, in our minds. And we can be, and that's why there's this saying that says there are billions of dollars that are in graves, because brilliant people have these ideas and they never take the ideas out of their head and make them a reality. And, it's like, you only need one idea to become a million, like one idea. Right. Jeff Bezos and Amazon, he had one idea, right? I mean, now obviously he's diversified, but Amazon was it for him, right? And it was the first company to hit a $1 trillion market cap. I mean, now we have Tesla, and I think there may be one other organization that did it, but we just need one idea. And so when we don't get it out of our heads, right? When we don't write it down, or like you said, even like creating a voice note and turning it into text, then it just stays out there in the ethos and it just circles around us. And if the idea is really for us to bring, it'll just literally stay there like, hey, I'm waiting for you. I'm waiting for you.
Right. And it's like the people that were connecting to me, like, I've had that idea for a book.
Yes.
Like I still feel like they'll probably someday write it, because I don't feel like it was going to go away, because they'd be like, I've been thinking of that for years. Mm-hmm. It's just like still there, like, hello, hello. Mm-hmm. I'm actually seeing this with my 14-year-old, because he's gotten really passionate about cooking. Ooh. And he'll start thinking about a recipe and he'll think about it. He'll talk about it. And until he cooks it, he'll keep bringing it up. Like, I think I want to make brownies. I was thinking about these brownies. I think I want to put salt on them. Like, I think I want to and until he makes it, like he keep, like my husband and I are like, just make the brownies. It's like, whatever, here's your stuff. Just make it. But I can see that that's how it's happening. Like, until he creates the physical product, the physical manifestation of it, he keeps thinking about it. And I think that's what, like, just bringing it, even if, like, say in the Amazon example, he started writing down, well, what does that look like, getting our packages within 24 hours? Like, would they pay that much shipping? Well, they probably wouldn't pay that much shipping. Right. What if I just had an annual shipping fee? Like, he's probably started listing out like what it's going to be and like fleshing it out. Yeah. I think people just often, when they have a hang up of writing, they're thinking of it like official. Or formal, or how they had to do it in grade school or high school or college. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking of it in the sense of like, oh, can it just be a tool that just I use? Yeah. And then if I feel like sharing it, I mean, you sometimes will see people's notes on Instagram where they've written on like a piece of paper and put it, and those feel powerful. Yes. Like they've written something after a meditation. It's like, you are enough. And they post it and you're like, I am enough, or whatever.
Yes. And then like millions of people share it. It's like, I am enough. And they just wrote it in their handwriting. Like, that was it. It wasn't
even a big deal. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't have to be anything other than whatever you feel like it is.
Yeah, I like that, because I know my biggest thing was, especially when I first became an entrepreneur, because I spent 15 years in corporate. I have my MBA. I wrote like a 91-page thesis, which obviously it's scholarly in a sense that it had to, follow APA format. But I mean, I use secondary sources, not primary sources, but it was, academic writing. And so when I first started as an entrepreneur, I would write the same way, like, like it was either, my writing was either professional, which was too professional, or it was academic. And I'm like, it didn't feel right for me. So I actually had to stop and take the time to discover like my own voice and what that voice sounded like in this role as an entrepreneur, in this role as a, as a life coach, as a trauma sensitive coach, as an intuitive coach, right? Like what does that voice sound like? And what's interesting is that each time I evolve, the voice changes, right? The way that I write, it changes because it has to, because I'm no longer here. Now I'm here. And so the voice changes, and I had to find a way or reconcile that and be okay with that, because before I'm like, I would write in the old voice and I'm like, that just doesn't sound right. Like, why doesn't that, it's supposed to sound, I'm me, I'm writing it. And it just doesn't jive. It doesn't vibe. And now I've learned to be okay with that. And that's normal, right?
Yeah. And I would even say that if you would have kept trying to stay in the old voice, it wouldn't resonate with people. You would find yourself wondering like, well, why aren't people reading my emails anymore? Yeah, I had the same experience because I was in corporate America for 10 years. And then, and I was in human resources. So everything had like a legal component that I wrote. Like it was very like official, like it really had to be where nothing could be misconstrued. And and I also got my master's in business and wrote even with like mathematically explaining stuff. So yeah, it can mess you up. But then if you are trying to connect to people and be relatable, you have to be yourself. Otherwise it doesn't connect. It just comes across. And even now, I think marketing's kind of trended toward that. Like people are being more authentic. I think that's why they're using the Instagram, like socialites or whatever you call them, because what is it? Influencers. Thank you. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Socialites.
I know what you meant though.
Like the influencers, because they're trying to promote like authenticity, whether they are or not is another story. But I think that's what they're trying to be relatable.
Yes.
And I think if you're writing from a place that's not who you are and relatable, it's just not going to connect.
Yeah. Because it's
not going to be a thing that people tell people like, oh my God, I read this person the other day. You have to go like sign up for their freebie or whatever.
Yeah. Because one of the things that I actually had to get comfortable with at first. So, well, you know this about me, and actually you picked up on it almost immediately. Like I say y'all, like I don't say, I every once in a while I'll be like you all, but that doesn't even, I wouldn't even know how
it doesn't sound right.
It right. It doesn't, you like that. No. But so I say y'all a lot, right? And for a long time, I wouldn't put that in my writing because I'm like, well, it's not professional, it's not academic. And then I had to realize, but wait a minute, when people hear me speak, I'm going to throw some y'alls out there like all the time. And then another thing, like I'm like, hey, love, hey, lovies, all of it. Like this is a part of who I am. So even when I like write my emails, I'm like, hey, love, or I'll sign it like I'll end it. I'll be like, one love, Andrea. Because it is who I am. And I had to learn to be okay with that because like I said, for so long, I'm like, I can't. And I'm like, yeah, you can, because people are going to hear you and they're going to be like, is this even the same person speaking?
Right. And I'm so jealous of your being able to use y'all because I can't use it here in Southern California. Like it just doesn't, we don't say it, but like, I no longer want to say you guys because that's like guys, like it's excluding females. And so I think right now there is a lack of another kind of endearing term to address people. I'll sometimes say friends or something because I'm like, but I'm always jealous of your y'all because I'm like, I would rather be like, hey, y'all than like, hey, friends. I can't say you guys. I struggle with that on my own. I'm like, I don't need to call people. I don't want to call them like spiritual entrepreneurs in an email. That's weird.
Right.
So I actually struggle. And I'm like, I would, if I was somewhere where I lived where we used it and it was truly part of my everyday speech, I would use it. So I'm like, dang, we need something.
I know. I love it. And now it's so funny because I don't know that I ever used y'all while I was in corporate, but now I like use it all. Like when I have like, well, before COVID, like had a speaking engagement, I would be like, and so here's what y'all need to know. And like I was saying, and these are like CEOs and CFOs and all of it, but it's like, this is who I am. And if I try to present this information in a way that's not me, it really truly is going to fall flat. I'm going to confuse myself and be all messed up and ain't nobody going to have a good time. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they'll just think it was formal or too official or.
Exactly.
And there has over time, like that connotation of like a suit, like you know, like I don't think we necessarily trust that business person anymore and the official person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
because there's been so much corruption and deceit and all of that stuff. Okay. So Nicole, this has been like such a great conversation. So thank you. So thank you so much, Nicole, for just like spending the time and sharing this with all of us, you know, the power of writing and how we can use writing as a healing modality. So 2 things before we leave. If you wanted people to walk away with just one thing of this entire conversation, the first question is, what would that one thing be? And number 2, I think you have something to share with them so that they can get their writing going. So do you want to talk about that a little bit? So 2 questions or
question. So one thing, I think it would just be not to overthink what writing is. I feel like we all do it. Like, I mean, we all are writing in some form or another.
Yeah.
And I just truly believe it's like magic. I really do believe that there's something special about it. So like, just like forget everything. Don't overthink it and just let it be its own thing. And then I do have a new course that I'm doing as like a freebie that people can sign up for at thewritingmedium.com/activate, which is to activate your soul's voice. Ooh. So it can be for your business, or it could just be to activate it, whichever they feel called to, but just a little way to have people reconnect with writing, what their soul's voice is, and start to understand when it's not and when it's interference. And, you know, we didn't talk about the inner child, but that's one that got in my, I don't want to say in my way, wanted to be heard a lot when I was trying to write. Or do anything, you know, it's like she spoke up a lot, and like learning to be like, okay, well, there's a time where I need to receive messages and there's a time where I need to make time for you, kind of thing. But it's just a tool to reconnect with your soul's voice and just get reacquainted with what does it sound like before anything else got in your head and all these other things happen. Just what does it sound like?
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I should say too, not necessarily sound, because other people know or feel,
right.
You know, I happen to hear, but for other people, it could be like a feeling or a knowing or vision.
Right. Yes.
But what is that like? How is it communicating with you?
Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm personally looking forward to like checking that one out. That sounds so good. So again, Nicole, thank you so much for spending the time to have this conversation with me, because you know that I admire you. I adore you. I respect your work. I love your work. And so I'm just grateful that you took the time to share this amazing, powerful information with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like it's our Voxer conversations come out in person. So it's not like we're not talking about everything. Now we just did it on camera.
Exactly.
On audio.
All right. So I'm going to put the link to where they can find you. And I'm also going to put the link to your freebie, amazing freebie, which probably sounds like it shouldn't be free. It should be paid, but you're going to do it for just a freebie for right now. We'll put that in the show notes so that the listeners can go to the website and then download it. So thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Hey loves, are you looking for a safe place to hang out while you're healing with other like-minded individuals? If so, then I would love for you to join my private Facebook community called Healing While Discovering Yourself, named after the podcast. This community is for those who are truly seeking a safe place to heal and also show up authentically. If this interests you, then I'm going to invite you to go to Facebook/groups/healing while discovering. I look forward to seeing you in the group. What would you do if you knew that in 5 minutes you could take back control of your life, calm your nerves, and shift into your power? You would take advantage of that offer, wouldn't you? Well, I would love to share with you my proprietary The More method. It's a method that I use every day to help me take back control of my life and master my inner world. See, I don't know if anyone has ever told you, but you are not just a physical being. You are not just a spiritual being, you are a multi-dimensional being. And that means that you are spiritual, you are mental, you are emotional, and you are physical. The More method is designed to help you truly take back control of your life and master your inner world, every area of your inner world, so that you can show up authentically and unapologetically. Go to themoremethod.co. Again, that's themoremethod.co to download the video and amazing guide to show you how to take back control of your life and master your inner world in as little as 5 minutes a day.